Before history had a name, before words were pressed into clay or carved into stone, the world was already full of stories. They spoke of a time when the sky came down to meet the earth, when luminous beings descended from the clouds, their feet stirring dust, their hands shaping rivers and destinies. Every culture, no matter how far apart, remembers that moment, a visitation, a gift, and a departure. In the low plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerians wrote that their gods descended from the heavens. They called them the Anunnaki, those who came from above. Along the Nile, Egyptian priests sang of Zep Tepi, the first time when the Neteru ruled the land directly. In the Vedic hymns of India, the Devas soared in radiant chariots, and across the oceans, the Maya remembered Itzamna, who taught them writing and number. The Hopi spoke of Kachinas, star beings who came down to guide. Different tongues, one story, that the gods walked among men. Archaeology calls this mythic convergence, a coincidence of imagination across civilizations that never met. But coincidence is a fragile word. How did people separated by oceans imagine the same kind of arrival? From the heavens, in light, bearing knowledge? Perhaps they were telling the same story through different eyes. Perhaps they were remembering. The evidence that remains is subtle. Ancient temples are oriented not to the mountains or rivers, but to the stars. Orion, Sirius, the Pleiades, as if each civilization had once known precisely where their teachers came from. From Mesopotamia to Mexico, sacred texts preserve nearly identical phrases. Those who descended, those who taught, those who will return. These are not metaphors of distant gods. They are coordinates pointing upward. Imagine the world in that first dawn of civilization, the earth raw and unmeasured, the stars so bright they seemed alive. To look up was to see possibility. To look down was to feel the tremor of creation itself. The first architects built ziggurats, not as tombs, but as bridges, stairways for beings who moved between realms. Priests mapped constellations onto clay, believing that the heavens were not beyond reach, but directly above the temple's spire. In the ruins of Eridu, oldest of Sumer's cities, archaeologists uncovered layers of temples stacked one atop another, each built on the same sacred spot for over 1,000 years. At its foundation they found strange marks. Animal bones arranged with deliberate symmetry, fragments of lapis lazuli and traces of fire. Rituals to summon light from above. Similar foundations appear beneath the earliest pyramids of Egypt, where offerings were placed to open the gate of the sky. Across continents, the same pattern emerges. The oldest shrines were never dedicated to war or harvest, but to descent. Modern linguistics finds echoes even in our words. In nearly every language, heaven and height share a root with light. To ascend was to illuminate. To descend was to bring fire. Perhaps the first gods were not abstractions, but literal beings of radiance, remembered as light, because that is how early eyes perceived them. Myth speaks in poetry, but poetry may preserve fact. We see them today in the same way our ancestors did, as patterns in the sky. We draw lines between stars and call them names. Orion the hunter, Sirius the dog, Venus the morning star. But behind those constellations lies an older story, the one whispered in every creation myth, that the gods came down, taught and left, and that we are the echo of their footsteps. The question is not whether they existed, but why they left. Some myths say the earth grew too loud, others that humanity became too ambitious. Still others tell of rebellion among the divine, wars that shook both heaven and earth. Whatever the reason, they departed, leaving behind ruins, calendars, and memories encoded in stone. The age of walking gods became the age of kings, and the sky grew silent. Yet the silence is deceptive. Every time we uncover an ancient tablet or align a monument to the stars, we touch that memory again. the instant when heaven and earth once met. The myths remember it as dawn, not because of time, but because of light, and in that light begins our story. For if the gods truly walk the earth, then somewhere in the dust of our oldest cities lies the reason they made us at all. To find that reason, we must return to the first act of creation, when divine hands shaped clay and blood into something that could serve, learn, and dream. That is where the trail begins, beneath the desert sun of ancient Sumer, in the cradle of rivers where history first awakened. In the cradle of the rivers, beneath layers of dust and time, lie the first written memories of humanity's own making. Pressed into clay thousands of years before the Bible, the tablets of Sumer whisper that the first humans were manufactured, not born. Their creators were not distant gods, but beings of flesh and will who walked among them, the Anunnaki. The tablets tell of a world already ancient when men were new. Above, in the realms of command, ruled Anu, Lord of the heavens. Below, on earth, Enlil, the stern master of wind and decree. And within the depths, Enki, god of wisdom, water, and secret knowledge. Beneath them laboured the Igigi, the lesser gods, forced to dig canals and shape the fertile plains. For 1,000 years they toiled until rebellion kindled in their hearts. It begins with fire. Tools thrown down, the work refused. The Igigi storm the gates of Enlil's temple, demanding freedom. Faced with mutiny in heaven's ranks, the gods hold council. Punishment, Enlil insists. But Enki proposes a quieter solution. If the gods will not labour, then let another race be made to bear the burden. The story that follows is clinical, not divine. Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag mix clay from the riverbanks with the blood of a slain deity. From this fusion of earth and essence, the first human arises, a hybrid of soil and starlight. The text names him Adapa, the wise, prototype of mankind. He is neither slave nor son, but something in between, a creature of purpose. When the first humans awaken, they do not speak of worship or freedom. They dig, they irrigate, they harvest. They maintain the order of the world. In this oldest story, humanity is not a miracle of love, but a function of necessity, a repair in the machinery of heaven. The gods created workers. But in doing so, they made beings who could think, and that perhaps was their first mistake. Scholars read these lines as metaphor, yet the language feels almost technical. They mixed the essence of the gods with the clay of the earth. If written today, one might call it hybridization, a genetic act cloaked in myth. The ancients did not have words for chromosomes or DNA. They had blood. They had breath. And from those materials they fashioned meaning. Across millennia, the same pattern appears. In Genesis, Adam is moulded from dust, animated by the breath of God. In Greek legend, Prometheus forms men from clay and fire. In the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the gods try mud, then wood, before creating men from maize. Different tongues, one archetype, creation through matter and mixture. Each version hints that life was not spontaneous but constructed, perfected through trial and error. Archaeology, in its quiet way, lends strange echoes. At Eridu and Uruk, the earliest temples reveal no transition from simple huts to monumental design. They appear suddenly, as if the blueprint was imported whole. The leap from hunter to city builder seems too abrupt, as though knowledge had been given. And written into those first tablets is the memory of who gave it. The tension between Enlil and Enki deepens through the myths. Enlil demands obedience, men as servants of the god's will. Enki, the trickster and sympathizer, defies that order. He teaches humanity language, irrigation, and healing. In one tale, he warns the sage Atrahasis of a coming flood, a secret that saves mankind but angers the council of heaven. In his rebellion, we glimpse a pattern, the conflict between control and compassion, authority, and knowledge. It is a pattern that will echo through every myth to come. Imagine that first awakening, a figure of clay rising under the gaze of beings not unlike ourselves but greater, their eyes bright with purpose. Perhaps it felt like dawn and dread combined, the birth of awareness under the weight of design. The first humans were shaped to serve, yet they soon began to wonder why. In that question, not the blood or the clay, lies the true spark of divinity. If these myths preserve memory rather than invention, they reveal more than creation. They record an experiment. The gods gave their essence to the soil, and the soil remembered. That memory is in us still. The longing to look up, the hunger to know who shaped us. Whether by divine hand or cosmic chance, we are built to ask. As time moved forward, the Anunnaki withdrew from daily life, leaving kings as their intermediaries, those chosen by the gods. Power passed from immortals to mortals, yet the echo remained. Rule by divine right, lineage sanctified by heaven. Kingship became the mask through which the gods continued to govern. And through that mask, they would reign for thousands of years, until the flood washed their memory into myth. The clay tablets end as they began, in silence. But the silence is not empty. It is the pause between creation and consequence, between the birth of mankind and the inheritance of the throne. For when the gods grew weary of ruling, they passed their scepter to humans, and so began the age of divine kings. When the gods stepped back from the rivers of Sumer, they did not vanish completely. They left something behind, a structure, a memory, a crown. It was said that kingship descended from heaven, bestowed upon those chosen to carry divine authority on earth. In that transfer, the line between God and man blurred, and the world entered the age of divine kings. Among the ruins of Mesopotamia, archaeologists uncovered one of the strangest texts ever written, the Sumerian king list. At first glance, it appears to be a simple record, a list of rulers and cities, but its numbers defy reason. 10 kings are said to have ruled before the Great Flood, their combined reigns stretching more than 120,000 years. After the flood, the reigns shorten abruptly, lifespans contracting until they match the limits of mortal men. Why record such impossible durations unless they remembered something extraordinary? To the Sumerians, this was not myth, but history. Each king was said to rule under the watch of the Anunnaki. Their thrones were extensions of the gods' will. Temples doubled as palaces, priests as bureaucrats. The divine and political were one system, a mirror of the heavens mapped onto the plains of earth. It was through these rulers that the gods maintained order long after they themselves had withdrawn. Imagine Eridu, Kish, Uruk, cities glowing under desert suns, each centered on a ziggurat that rose toward the sky like a stairway for gods. From those high terraces, kings gazed at the stars their ancestors once walked among. Inscriptions call them shepherds of the people, a title implying guardianship, not ownership. They were to care for humanity as the gods once had, a delegation of duty from heaven to earth. But power, once given, rarely stays pure. Over generations, the kings began to claim divinity themselves. The idea of god-kings spread like a contagion across the ancient world. In Egypt, pharaohs declared themselves living gods, direct descendants of Ra. In China, emperors ruled under the mandate of heaven. In Mesoamerica, rulers traced their bloodlines to celestial serpents. What began as stewardship became sovereignty, and in that shift, humanity stepped into the god's shadow and began to mistake it for its own. To some scholars, the Sumerian king list encodes astronomical data rather than biography. Each 1,000-year reign marking a celestial cycle, a pattern of conjunctions and floods. But what if both readings are true? Perhaps the ancients measured time not only by stars, but by beings whose lives stretched across those cycles. To describe them as kings was the only language they had left. To call their reigns ages was to record how long the world stayed under their rule. Archaeology finds hints but not answers. In the deepest layers of Eridu and tools and pottery show abrupt leaps in sophistication. City walls appear fully planned, not grown from villages, as though the blueprint of civilization was not invented but inherited. Inscriptions credit the gods with teaching writing, metalwork, and astronomy, gifts of divine origin that appear suddenly complete. Humanity, it seems, did not rise by slow evolution alone. It was inducted. When the flood came, whether mythic or real, it was said that the divine kings perished and the gods withdrew entirely. What survived were names etched into clay, their meaning half remembered. To later scribes, those names became symbols of order, of legitimacy. Every new ruler claimed descent from the line that came down from the sky. Even today, in coronations and oaths, echoes remain, phrases like, "by the grace of heaven," or "under God." Linguistic fossils of an older world where that grace was literal. The shift from divine presence to divine memory marks a crucial fracture in human history. Before, people served beings they could see. After, they served the idea of those beings. And in serving the idea, they built civilizations. Temples became bureaucracies of belief. Law replaced decree. But beneath every crown a question persisted. If kingship descended once, could it descend again? Perhaps the gods withdrew not in anger, but in intention. To teach humanity rule through imitation, to let their children carry the weight of order and failure alike. In gifting kingship, they gave responsibility and consequence. But as divine blood thinned through generations, remembrance turned to ambition. Kings who once ruled in service to the heavens began to rule for themselves. The divine flame cooled into politics, and the god's design eroded into empire. What had been a bridge between worlds became a throne room of men. Still, in the quiet of ziggurats and the whisper of reed tablets, there lingers the belief that once, just once, heaven's authority sat upon the earth in flesh and crown. That belief would shape everything to come. Pyramids, temples, dynasties, empires, all built to reclaim the touch of the divine. And nowhere did that memory burn brighter than along the Nile, where the first time was said never to have ended. In the shimmer of the Nile's morning haze, memory and myth merge into one. Egypt's priests did not speak of beginnings. They spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods themselves ruled the land before any mortal pharaoh took the throne. It was not a story of creation, but of inheritance. For in their eyes, Egypt was not founded by man at all. It was restored. The temple inscriptions of Heliopolis describe a moment when the primeval waters receded and a mound of light rose from the abyss. Upon that mound stood Atum-Ra, the self-begotten son, who called forth the first generation of gods. From him descended Shu and Tefnut, Geb the earth, Nut the sky, and through them the line of Osiris, Isis, Seth, and Horus. These were not distant abstractions, but tangible rulers whose reigns stretched for thousands of years. When mortal dynasties finally began, the scribes wrote only, "Kingship passed to men." It was the same phrase carved long before in Sumer. Across Egypt, evidence of that divine legacy hides in plain sight. At Abydos, walls tell of gods who sailed the sky in luminous boats. At Edfu, the building texts recall a sacred island destroyed in a flood, rebuilt by the followers of Horus, beings of radiant form who carried knowledge of measurement and stone. The priests of Sais spoke of an age before the flood, when the gods raised monuments to mark the heavens upon the earth. These were not poetic metaphors, they were instructions. The Great Pyramid itself is the enduring testament to that first time. Its base aligns almost perfectly to true north. Its proportions encode the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its polar diameter. Even stripped of its casing stones, it hums with precision. Mainstream history tells us that farmers, ropes, and copper tools achieved this. But to stand before it is to feel design, not improvisation. A resonance that suggests memory rather than invention. Ancient art amplifies the riddle. Gods and early pharaohs are depicted with elongated heads and slender limbs, as if stylized to recall another form. Akhenaten, in particular, seems carved from a different template, neither fully human nor divine, but transitional. Was his peculiar image symbolic? Or was it the echo of a lineage claiming blood older than history? Even in death masks, the eyes of gold and lapis are tilted upward, fixed eternally on the stars. Zep Tepi also left its mark in ritual. Every coronation was an act of restoration, not succession. When a new pharaoh ascended the throne, he was not beginning a reign. He was re-establishing the order of the first time. The pyramid texts describe this as the moment when the king becomes Horus in life and Osiris in death, a cycle mirroring sunrise and sunset. In that duality, kingship became cosmic maintenance, the keeping of balance between worlds. Modern archaeology sees continuity between early dynasties and Neolithic cultures along the Nile. But the leap from mud brick to limestone geometry is abrupt, like a flame reigniting an old pattern. Zep Tepi may represent not mythic fancy, but a recovered memory. Knowledge carried from a civilization that fell beneath the waters and was reborn in the valley of the Nile. The priests themselves said as much, that the wisdom of Thoth, god of writing and calculation, was preserved from a previous world. He was the architect of time, the keeper of the books of the first gods. At night, when the desert cools and the stars sharpen above Giza, the alignment becomes unmistakable. The three great pyramids mirror the belt of Orion. Their descending shafts point to Sirius, the same star worshipped in Sumer as the dwelling of Anu. Two lands, one stellar blueprint, as if each civilization inherited fragments of a single celestial map. If the Sumerians remembered how the gods made man, the Egyptians remembered how they ruled. Their temples were not places of petition, but of maintenance, machines of order designed to keep heaven and earth in harmony. Every wall, every hymn was part of that mechanism. To the Egyptians, decay was not inevitable. It was rebellion. To live correctly was to keep the rhythm that the gods had set in motion during the first time. Perhaps that is why they built in stone, to defy entropy, to make memory endure where flesh could not. Each monument was a resurrection, each ritual a repetition, ensuring that the gods, though absent, would never truly fade. Even now, standing in the shadow of the pyramids, one can feel that continuity, the pulse of something immeasurably old beneath one's feet, a hum beneath the silence. And yet, Zep Tepi also hints at tragedy. For every text that celebrates divine order also laments its loss. The gods, it says, sailed back to the stars. Their temples became tombs, their instruments mysteries. The world did not end, it forgot. But Egypt's memory would not die with the setting sun. It would cross deserts and mountains, carried by traders and wanderers, reaching lands where gods rode the sky in thunder and fire. If Zep Tepi was the memory of a golden dawn, then the next chapter would remember its burning twilight, a time when the heavens became a battlefield and divine order turned to war. Night falls over Giza like a curtain of silence. The desert breathes in the cooling air, and the pyramids emerge from shadow, vast, immovable silhouettes against a sky still salted with stars. For 5,000 years they have stood here, their purpose debated, their builders argued over, their perfection undeniable. But beneath the weight of centuries, a question hums like static through stone. What if these were never tombs at all? What if they were instruments, machines designed to speak to the gods who once walked the earth? The Great Pyramid of Khufu rises with the precision of mathematics that should not have existed in its age. Its base aligns almost perfectly with the four cardinal directions. The angle of its sides encodes P and F, constants that would not be defined until millennia later. Its height multiplied by 1,000 approximates the distance from Earth to the Sun. Even stripped of casing stones, the geometry remains immaculate, as if the builders had access to a language of measure that transcended time itself. Inside, the silence deepens. The king's chamber, constructed from massive slabs of rose granite, resonates at 440 Hz, the same frequency musicians call the note of A. Sound within it does not echo, it vibrates. Each wall amplifies and sustains tone, transforming voice into vibration, vibration into energy. Some researchers suggest that when the chamber was sealed, the pyramid itself would hum, a living resonator. Could it have been a generator, an amplifier, a bridge? In the mythology of Göbekli Tepe, the gods spoke with the voice of thunder and light. Perhaps these structures were built to recreate that conversation. Electricians and physicists have found further curiosities. The pyramid's limestone casing acts as an insulator, while the granite core conducts. In miniature experiments, a weak electromagnetic field forms within its geometry, particularly near the king's chamber. Skeptics call it coincidence, but coincidence rarely builds monuments aligned to stars, sized to planets, and tuned to resonance. The ancient Egyptians called the pyramid Per-Nata, House of the Gods. Nowhere in the texts does it explicitly say tomb. In fact, no pharaoh's mummy has ever been found within the Great Pyramid. Instead, they left us a word repeated again and again: Akhet, horizon. It meant not just where the sun rises, but where the soul becomes light. The pyramid, then, was not a resting place, but a device of transformation. Legends from later dynasties say that beneath the pyramids lay chambers of knowledge, sealed against flood and fire. The god Thoth, keeper of wisdom, was said to have stored within them scrolls of power, meant to awaken humanity after the age of forgetting. Whether those scrolls were literal or symbolic, the intent is clear: preservation, not death. The pyramids were not monuments to the past, but safeguards for the future. Imagine the builders, not as slaves but initiates, working in resonance with geometry. Each stone placed to a harmonic ratio, each corridor angled to the path of a star. When sunlight struck the polished limestone, the pyramid would have gleamed like a frozen beam, a structure of light reflecting the heavens. It was less a building than an equation, less a tomb than a signal. And that signal, according to some, pointed to Orion, the celestial home of Osiris, the resurrected god. The shafts in the Great Pyramid align precisely with stars in Orion's belt, and with Sirius, the bright companion of Isis. Together they formed a cosmic map, heaven mirrored on earth. To ascend the pyramid in ritual was to walk the path of the gods returning to the stars. To descend into its depths was to travel backward through creation, back to the first time. Yet perhaps the pyramid's true function was subtler. The ancients spoke of the breath of Ra and the voice of stone. In temple hymns, priests chanted tones designed to make walls tremble, the same frequencies that modern experiments reproduce in granite chambers. Resonance, energy, light, the language of physics dressed in sacred verse. If the gods once communicated through vibration, as sound or frequency, the pyramids may have been the last translators of that tongue. But why stop building them? Why let the last pyramid rise and then never again attempt such scale? One answer whispers through Egyptian myth: because the gods had already gone. The pyramids were farewell gifts, not launch pads. Once the dialogue between heaven and earth ended, the language of stone fell silent. What was once a machine became memory. Even so, the pattern repeats across continents. In Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun shares nearly identical proportions. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat mirrors the same celestial map of Orion. The geometry of Giza reappears as if inscribed upon the human subconscious. Whoever or whatever first taught these proportions had long vanished, yet their code persisted, as though embedded in the design of civilization itself. Standing at the base of the Great Pyramid at dusk, you can feel it, a pulse too slow for the ear, too deep for the heart. The desert wind funnels through its corridors, humming softly like breath caught between worlds. It is the sound of memory made stone. If the gods ever walked this earth, this is where they stood last, watching their reflection fade from the horizon. But in the east, across the mountains, another story was unfolding, one not of builders, but of warriors. There the sky itself became a battlefield, and the weapons of the gods burned brighter than the sun. Across the heat and dust of the Indian subcontinent, the ancient epics still echo like distant thunder. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana are not mere poems. They are vast chronicles of gods and kings, spanning thousands of verses, older than empires. Within their lines shimmer descriptions that sound less like myth and more like memory. A memory of a time when the heavens themselves went to war. The Mahabharata tells of a battle so immense that the sky was torn open by weapons of light. Arrows became beams that split the clouds. Winds turned molten, and entire cities vanished in a flash brighter than 10,000 suns. It was called the Brahmastra, the weapon of the creator god. When unleashed, it left wastelands poisoned, rivers unfit to drink, and survivors whose hair and nails fell away. To the ancients, it was divine wrath. To modern ears, it sounds eerily familiar. The Sanskrit texts describe these weapons not as magic, but as engineered marvels. They were astras, divine armaments, invoked by mantra, directed by mind and command. Each had specifications: speed, range, destructive power. Their use was carefully restricted by moral codes, suggesting the ancients feared their potential as much as they revered it. One verse even warns that if misused, they could consume the world as fire consumes grass. In the skies above these battles, vimanas roared, radiant flying vehicles carrying warriors and gods alike. The Ramayana describes one such craft, the Pushpaka Vimana, capable of rising vertically, travelling vast distances and even shifting shape. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a later Sanskrit treatise, offers designs for machines that move in the air by fire and mercury. These were not poetic abstractions. They were technical outlines in a language that did not yet know the word aerodynamics. Archaeology lends haunting parallels. At Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, cities of the Indus Valley, excavation teams found streets fused into glass-like surfaces as if exposed to extreme heat. Skeletons lay as if felled in an instant, their bones showing traces of radiation higher than natural background levels. Conventional explanations, fire, plague, drought, fail to fit every clue. If not divine war, then what disaster could have left such marks? Some scientists propose meteor impacts, volcanic events, or lightning storms, but the stories say otherwise. They tell of blazing discs and machines that rained fire, of gods who came from the sky and wielded thunder, not of the clouds but of knowledge. The Devas and Asuras, gods and their rivals, were not opposites of good and evil. They were kin, divided by ideology, their war a struggle for dominion over both heaven and earth. Like Enki and Enlil before them, they represented order and rebellion, a cosmic duality that mirrored human conflict. Perhaps the war of Kurukshetra, the great battlefield of the Mahabharata, was not only a mythic tale of morality, but a record of catastrophe, a memory of a time when beings, divine or otherwise, used technology so advanced that it could erase civilizations. The epic itself ends with a warning that such weapons must never be used again, for they are fire beyond comprehension. It is a warning that echoes eerily across millennia into our own atomic age, Yet the epics also speak of preservation. When the gods realized that their war threatened the world, Vishnu intervened, descending in avatars to restore balance. He became Rama, Krishna, and countless forms thereafter, each a reminder that divine intervention often comes not as conquest, but correction. The pattern reappears: creation, corruption, destruction, and renewal. A cosmic rhythm seen in every civilization's myths. The imagery of the Vimanas haunts the imagination. They are described as chariots of the sky, shining like fire, thundering as they rose. One text says they were powered by mercury vortex engines, another that they were vehicles of light moving by thought. To the skeptic, such descriptions are allegory. To the believer, they are the technological fingerprints of a forgotten age. Even Leonardo da Vinci, in his sketches of flying machines, drew upon ancient Indian manuscripts preserved by travellers who spoke of flying palaces. Could the Devas and Asuras have been the same beings remembered elsewhere? The Anunnaki of Sumer, the Necheru of Egypt, the Watchers of Enoch? Each tradition tells of luminous entities descending from the sky, teaching, ruling, and then destroying themselves in war. If these are cultural mirrors of a single lost epoch, then India preserves its most detailed record, a chronicle not of fantasy, but of fallout. Imagine the sky over ancient Kurukshetra, clouds spiralling into a vortex, a blinding sphere rising, sound folding into silence, then darkness and the slow fall of ash. A memory of apocalypse so old that it turned to religion, so specific that it sounds like science. When the fires finally died, the epics tell us, the gods withdrew. Their weapons were sealed, their cities abandoned, their presence fading into legend. They left humanity to rebuild among the ruins, and from those ruins, new civilizations emerged, humbled, half remembering the powers that once destroyed them. But myths have long memories. In later ages, the stories of divine wars and forbidden knowledge would return. In Sumer, in the Hebrew texts, in Greece, all whispering of the same transgression. The gods had given too much to mankind, and mankind had learned too much from the gods. Balance had been broken. Order demanded erasure. The flood was coming. High upon Mount Hermon, where snow gathers even in summer, the old texts say a pact was sworn under the stars. 200 beings stood in the thin air, luminous against the night, and bound themselves by oath. They called themselves the Watchers, sent to observe humanity, not to touch it. But desire outweighed obedience, and what began as curiosity became defiance. This was the moment the heavens began to fall. The Book of Enoch, hidden for centuries in the highlands of Ethiopia, tells their story. The Watchers descended not in wrath but in longing. They looked upon the daughters of men and found them beautiful. Led by Samyaza and Azazel, they made a covenant. Let us choose wives among them and beget children. And so they did. And from those unions came the Nephilim, giants of old, beings of immense stature and appetite. The Watchers also brought gifts. Azazel taught the art of metal, forging weapons and ornaments from Earth's blood. Kokabel taught the secrets of the stars, how to chart them and name their courses. Penemu revealed writing, symbols to trap thought in clay. And Armoros taught enchantment, how to bend unseen forces through word and will. In these lines lies a haunting symmetry. The very crafts that mark the dawn of civilization, metallurgy, astronomy, language, mathematics, are attributed to forbidden teachers. For a time, humanity flourished. Cities rose. Knowledge expanded. But with it came pride. The Nephilim consumed all they touched. They devoured flocks, fields, even men. The balance between heaven and earth broke beneath their hunger, and the Creator, seeing the corruption, sent judgment. The spirits of heaven have mingled with flesh, and the earth is defiled. I will cleanse it. The Book of Enoch describes the punishment with terrifying clarity. The archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, descend to bind the watchers in chains beneath the mountains, sealing them in darkness until the end of days. Their hybrid children are slain in the flood, their spirits condemned to wander as shadows. Azazel, the great transgressor, is cast into the desert, his name becoming a curse. What remains is silence, the sound of knowledge drowned. To modernize, it reads like myth, but if the story is read as memory, it becomes the echo of something older. An age when beings from beyond interfered with a young species, accelerating its progress and perhaps its downfall. The Watchers become the archetype of intervention gone wrong, cosmic scientists punished for their compassion or their hubris. Archaeology offers strange parallels. Across the ancient world, myths arise at the same time. Gods who teach forbidden arts, then vanish after catastrophe. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu sages brought wisdom from the Abzu, then were banished after the flood. In Greece, Prometheus steals fire for mankind and is chained to a mountain. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl gifts knowledge, then departs across the sea in sorrow. The pattern is too precise to ignore. Knowledge gifted, chaos unleashed, punishment delivered. Perhaps this story is less about rebellion than resonance. If consciousness is the bridge between divine and mortal, then sharing it was the ultimate transgression. The Watchers may not have broken a law of heaven, they may have broken a law of balance. For every gift of power demands a gift of wisdom, and humanity was not yet ready to carry both. Geneticists today trace fragments of mystery in our DNA, sudden leaps in cognition and language around 50,000 years ago, as if intelligence itself ignited overnight. Anthropology calls it the Great Leap Forward. Myth calls it the moment of forbidden contact. Could this be the echo of what the ancients tried to describe? An infusion of knowledge, literal or symbolic, that transformed animals into architects of meaning? The Book of Enoch ends not with destruction but warning. The flood is not just wrath, it is erasure, a reset meant to restore the balance between heaven and earth. Humanity would begin again, smaller, humbler, carrying only fragments of the knowledge once freely given. The angel's descent becomes the metaphor for every era when invention outruns morality, when power exceeds comprehension. And in that warning, we see a mirror of our own age. If the Watchers fell for love and curiosity, perhaps their sin was the same spark that drives every discovery. We are their heirs, inheritors of both their gift and their guilt. Every circuit, every telescope, every atom split is another step down the mountain they once climbed. Maybe the chain that bound them was not punishment, but protection, to keep them from repeating what we are now attempting again. The flood that ended their age was said to be absolute. The world washed clean of hybrids and giants, of knowledge too heavy for the soil. But floods do not erase memory. They only bury it deep, waiting for the water to recede. And when it did, the earth was quiet. The heavens were sealed. And humanity, left alone for the first time, looked up at an empty sky and remembered only the silence after the gods fell. The world drowned once. Every myth says so, though they give the deluge different names. To the Sumerians, it was the flood that ended the reign of kings who ruled for thousands of years. To the Hebrews, it was Noah's Ark and divine judgment. To the Maya, it was the destruction of the wooden people. To the Greeks, Deucalion and Pyrrha cast stones behind them to repopulate the earth. Different tongues, same memory, a cleansing, a reset, a world washed clean. The Epic of Gilgamesh, oldest of all, tells it best. Warned by the god Ea, the sage Utnapishtim builds a vessel sealed with pitch, carrying seed and life of every kind. For 7 days and nights the storm rages. For 7 more the waters linger. When the sun returns, humanity's noise has been silenced. It is a pattern of destruction as old as time itself. The gods create, the world grows corrupt, and the flood restores the balance. But what exactly did it wash away? Geology offers its own testimony. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the Pleistocene, the Earth convulsed. Temperatures plummeted overnight. Sea levels rose in violent bursts known as meltwater pulses 1A and 1B. Glacial lakes burst their ice dams, carving canyons in days that look like they took millennia. In Greenland's ice cores, a layer of platinum dust marks the signature of cosmic impact, perhaps a fragment of comet striking the northern hemisphere. The Younger Dryas boundary layer glitters with nanodiamonds and carbon spherules, evidence of fire, not myth. The Earth itself remembers the flood. Civilizations before recorded history, if they existed, would not have survived such a cataclysm intact. Continents shifted, coastlines vanished, and memory drowned with them. Yet fragments endured, oral traditions carried by survivors, encoded in ritual and myth. Every culture that emerged after carried within its Genesis story the same pattern: an age of gods, a transgression, a cleansing sea. Even the language of the Bible preserves it. The fountains of the deep were broken up. Those words may be poetic, or they may describe the crust itself cracking open. If the Watcher's descent was an act of interference, then the flood was its correction. The Creator, the Council, the unseen order, whatever name one gives to the force behind it, sought to erase the hybrid world and begin again. The myths are explicit. All flesh had corrupted its way. The Nephilim drowned, the cities fell, and the knowledge of heaven sank beneath the waves. In one act, the gods destroyed their own experiment to save creation from itself. But in every myth, there are survivors. A remnant, those who were warned, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim, Noah, Manu, chosen to preserve life and memory. Each is instructed to carry the seeds of rebirth, animals, plants, tools, and knowledge of the stars. It is as if the flood was not annihilation, but pruning. A reset, yes, but one designed to restart the cycle, purified of its corruption. Humanity after the flood would remember the gods only through symbols and ruins. The heavens would fall silent. The age of men had begun. Archaeologists studying the Black Sea found evidence of a massive inundation around 5600 BC, seawater breaching from the Mediterranean, drowning villages in days. Sonar maps show ancient shorelines now 400 feet below modern depths. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, divers discovered submerged stone structures older than any known temple, hinting at cities swallowed by rising seas. These are not myths, but stratigraphy. Science, remembering what Scripture mourns. And yet the flood stories carry another undertone: regret. In the Atrahasis epic, the gods weep as the waters rise. Even Enlil, the harsh judge, mourns the loss of his creation. Perhaps the flood was never meant to erase humanity, but to reset the balance between heaven and earth, to remove the noise that drowned the silence where divinity once spoke. When the waters receded, the survivors looked upon a changed world. Mountains bore the scars of torrents. Forests had turned to deserts. The stars seemed shifted, their old alignments broken. It was as if time itself had restarted, the calendar reset to zero. They began to build again, guided by dreams of the world that had been, by whispers of the gods who had walked beside them before the sea came. Even today, the memory persists. From the Andes to the Himalayas, from the Mississippi to the Nile, people still speak of a flood that ended an age. Not a metaphor, but a memory encoded in DNA, passed down like an instinct of water and fear. When storms rise and rivers swell, something ancient stirs in us, an echo of the moment we were nearly erased. Perhaps that is why water still feels sacred. It destroys, but it also renews. It cleanses, but it remembers. Every flood since has been a ritual reenactment, a small echo of the Great Reset that once wiped the slate of civilization clean, and when the survivors looked to the sky, they found it empty. The gods were gone, their voices replaced by thunder and wind. Temples would soon rise to fill that silence, and faith would become the bridge to what was lost. The flood did not just drown a world, it drowned a relationship. Heaven had withdrawn. The divine experiment had ended, or merely paused. But myths never end in emptiness. Across the desolate world that followed, a new age began. An age of silence, of kings without gods, of prayers without answers. And in that silence, humanity began to wonder, did the gods abandon us, or retreat into the very earth beneath our feet? When the waters finally withdrew, the world was washed clean, not only of cities, but of certainty. The heavens, once alive with voices and fire, fell quiet. No more did the gods walk among men. No more did stars answer the prayers of kings. And in that quiet, humanity learned the sound of absence. Every civilization that rose after the flood carried the weight of that silence. The Sumerians, rebuilding their temples, wrote hymns to gods who no longer appeared. The Egyptians, still keeping the calendar of the first time, spoke of the hidden one, Amun, whose face was unseen. Across the Levant, prophets wandered deserts, calling for a voice that did not reply. The age of contact had become the age of longing. Yet in the void left behind, something remarkable happened. Imagination replaced memory. Where once the gods stood as rulers, they became ideals, symbols of order, justice, and fate. Faith emerged from loss, not presence. The divine no longer needed to walk the earth to shape it. Humanity would do that on their behalf. Archaeology traces this transformation in the very bones of culture. In the earliest ziggurats and temples, offerings were pragmatic: food, oil, livestock, gifts to feed living gods. After the flood, offerings became metaphors: incense, prayers, sacred words. Worship shifted from physical exchange to spiritual yearning. The architecture changed too. The old pyramids and terraces that reached skyward gave way to sanctuaries turned inward, chambers of echo, meditation, and mystery. The dialogue with heaven had become an echo chamber of the soul. In Egypt, this transition took form in the rise of Amun, the hidden one. Once minor, Amun became supreme, not by conquest but by withdrawal. His invisibility became his power. To see him was impossible. To feel him was faith. It was a theology built upon absence, a divine mirror reflecting human desire for contact. The Hebrews carried a similar notion. The God of Abraham spoke from clouds and fire, yet forbade images. He was present, yet unseen, a being defined by what could not be depicted. In that unseen God lay a profound truth. The divine had retreated into mystery, no longer tangible, but no less real. Humanity had matured enough to sustain belief without evidence. Perhaps that was the lesson of the flood. The silence, though, was not uniform. Across Mesoamerica, legends told that the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, once walked among men but sailed east, promising to return. In Greece, Zeus no longer descended to earth but ruled from Olympus, distant yet watchful. In India, the gods took avatars, fleeting incarnations that appeared, then dissolved back into the eternal. Everywhere, the divine grew subtle, appearing only in dreams, symbols, and prophets' visions. Heaven had not abandoned earth entirely. It had become invisible to teach humanity to see differently. Yet the silence was also a burden. Priests sought signs where none came. Kings built monuments hoping to lure back the divine gaze. The pyramids and ziggurats became monuments to memory, tombs not of bodies, but of faith itself. And sometimes that silence broke men. In the absence of gods, empires rose pretending to be divine. Where gods once ruled by wisdom, men ruled by fear. Divine right became political dogma. The same fire that once built civilization now burned beneath crowns. But not all took the silence as loss. Mystery schools from Egypt to Greece whispered that the gods had not left at all. They had gone beneath the world. In hidden chambers and under sacred mountains, initiates claim to speak with luminous beings who sleep until the stars are right again. The gods, they said, had retreated into the earth to wait for the next cycle, the next alignment of heaven and man. Perhaps this was how myth softened memory, by turning departure into dormancy. Across the ruins, fragments of celestial knowledge persisted. Alignments with Orion, calendars tuned to Sirius, rituals matching solstices and equinoxes. These were breadcrumbs left for those who remembered. Each temple rebuilt was a question. Are you still watching? And though no thunder answered, perhaps something deeper did. A hum, a resonance in the stone, a pulse beneath the ground. This was the age when humanity, deprived of its teachers, became the teacher itself. We began to seek what the gods once embodied: creation, invention, understanding. We learned to write our own destinies, to speak in the gods' silence, to build where they once commanded. It was both freedom and exile. We had inherited the world, but the cost of inheritance was solitude. Still, the myths would not let go. Everywhere a single phrase persisted: they will return. Not as conquerors, but as reminders. When the cycle turns, when the stars align as they once did, the flood had ended their reign. Time itself would bring it back. And so humanity waited, building, remembering, forgetting, and waiting again. Across the ocean, in another land born of light and feathers, new gods would rise, not to rule, but to teach. Their temples would mirror the stars. Their silence would echo the same absence, and their story would begin with a question carved in stone. Who were the gods that left, and who were the ones that promised to return? Beneath the high sun of central Mexico, the ruins of Teotihuacan stretch across a vast plateau, an abandoned geometry of stone and silence. Its name, given by the later Aztecs, means the place where gods were made. No one knows who built it or why it was deserted long before their arrival, but its avenues still whisper a message older than memory, that the divine once walked here and that humanity tried to follow. The city's layout mirrors the heavens. The pyramid of the sun, colossal and austere, aligns perfectly with the setting sun on specific days of the year. The pyramid of the moon marks the northern horizon, and between them runs the Avenue of the Dead, a grand causeway aligned not by chance but by starlight. Its axis points to the setting of the Pleiades and the rising of Orion's belt, the same constellations mirrored in Egypt, Sumer, and countless other sacred sites. It is as if the architects of Teotihuacan were completing a pattern that circled the globe. When archaeologists tunneled beneath the Pyramid of the Sun, they found something extraordinary: a tunnel filled with powdered mica, a mineral with reflective, insulating properties. Later excavations under the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent uncovered mercury, sealed in a chamber like a river of light. Mercury was sacred to the ancients, a liquid mirror, a substance of transformation. Was it symbolic, ritualistic, or was it part of a forgotten technology that once linked matter with the divine? The god most revered here was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a being both human and celestial, teacher of astronomy, agriculture, and art. In every story, he stands apart from the bloodthirsty pantheons of his time. He forbids human sacrifice, preaches compassion, and promises to return from across the eastern sea when the age renews. To his followers, he was not a conqueror, but a redeemer, a god of light clothed in humility. And like Osiris, Enki, and Prometheus before him, his gift of knowledge would cost him exile. In some versions of the myth, Quetzalcoatl is betrayed by the trickster god Tezcatlipoca. Tricked into drunkenness, shamed, he sets himself ablaze and transforms into the morning star. In others, he sails away upon a serpent-shaped raft of fire, disappearing into the east, leaving only prophecy behind, that one day he would return when the same star rises again. It is the same refrain sung by every civilization touched by the gods. They left, but they will return. Archaeologists studying the site have found that Teotihuacan's core buildings were constructed all at once, not gradually. A planned city born fully formed. Its engineers mastered acoustics, crafting plazas where a whisper can carry across hundreds of feet, and temples that echo the call of the Quetzal bird. Such design suggests not improvisation, but inheritance. A blueprint remembered, not invented. The builders seemed less like founders of a city than guardians of a sacred pattern. In the murals that survive, the feathered serpent coils among stars, shedding jewels that fall to the earth and become seeds. Water flows from his body, nourishing fields below. He is the bridge between heaven and soil, spirit and matter, the eternal union that earlier civilizations had lost. But just as before, harmony turns to hubris. When later cultures rediscovered Teotihuacan, they transformed its message. Rituals of peace became rituals of blood. The city that once sang to the stars became a tomb of silence. Even its destruction is a mystery. Archaeological evidence suggests deliberate burning. Temples torched, idols smashed, offerings buried in haste. Perhaps rebellion, perhaps despair. Perhaps the people felt the gods had abandoned them once more and sought to purge the city of unanswered prayers. Whatever the cause, Teotihuacan fell. But its pattern survived, encoded into the civilizations that followed. The Maya, the Toltecs, and later the Aztecs inherited its prophecy, that the god of light would return from the east when the fifth sun was ending. And so, centuries later, when pale-sailed ships appeared over the horizon, the people of Mexico mistook men for gods. The conqueror Hernán Cortés arrived on the very day foretold for Quetzalcoatl's return. The irony was cruel and cosmic, myth mistaking memory, destiny turning to tragedy. It was the final echo of that ancient promise, the return of the gods misread as conquest. Teotihuacan remains an enigma because it was never just a city. It was a message carved in architecture, a bridge between stars and stone, repeating the same geometry found in Egypt, Cambodia, and the Andes. Everywhere, civilizations kept building the same shape, chasing the same resonance, as if guided by an ancestral blueprint left by vanished teachers. Perhaps that was their way of calling upward again, to rebuild the resonance lost when the gods fell silent. At twilight, when the last light fades over the Valley of Mexico, the pyramids still hold a presence. Tourists leave, but the air remains charged, the stones warm as if remembering sunlight. Stand upon the Pyramid of the Moon and look down the Avenue of the Dead. The line of sight stretches straight to the horizon where Orion sinks, just as it does at Giza. The same stars, the same alignment, the same question. Who taught them this? Across the sea, another civilization carved messages that could only be read from the heavens. Vast drawings traced upon the desert. Their makers, too, were calling to the sky. Their lines, like the Avenue of the Dead, were prayers in geometry, awaiting an answer. In the desert of southern Peru, where the wind never rains and the earth rarely breathes, lines run endlessly across the ground. Vast geometric shapes, spirals, and creatures drawn upon the desert floor. They are so immense that they can only be seen from above. For centuries, no one knew they were there. To the Nazca people who carved them 2,000 years ago, they were not art. They were communication. Messages written in a language the sky might still remember. From the ground, the lines seem like meaningless trenches. shallow grooves cut into rust-red soil, but from the air they form figures: a spider, a hummingbird, a monkey, a condor stretching its wings across hundreds of feet. Some are aligned perfectly to solstices and constellations, others run like runways toward invisible horizons. Even now, they resist complete explanation. Were they astronomical calendars, ceremonial pathways, or were they something more? A code sent upward, waiting for the watchers who once descended to find their way home again. The Nazca were not alone in looking skyward. Across the world, the Maya told of gods who came from the stars and shaped man from corn. In their Popol Vuh, the creator deities formed humans first from mud, then wood, before finding the perfect mixture, maize and blood. Corn was not just food, it was essence, the sacred substance of life. To this day, in the highlands of Guatemala, elders still whisper that we are people of corn, a truth older than agriculture. Perhaps they meant more than farming. Perhaps they remembered a literal crafting of life. In the Popol Vuh, the gods who made mankind are called Heart of Sky and Heart of Earth, beings who blend the material and the celestial. They give humanity vision, thought, and memory. But as always, there is a warning. Humans begin to see too far, understand too much, so the gods cloud their eyes, limiting their reach. It is the same motif found in Eden, in Enoch, in Sumer: creation, illumination, and the gentle closing of the gate. Across the ocean, in the mesas of the American Southwest, the Hopi people speak of the Kachinas, luminous spirits who descend from the stars to teach, to heal, to remind humanity of balance. They wear masks representing constellations, and each year the Hopi dance to call them back. The prophecy of the blue star Kachina says that one day a star will appear in the heavens, signalling the end of the fourth world and the beginning of the fifth, the renewal of time itself. For the Hopi, this is not destruction, but restoration. The gods do not return to punish. They return to reset the harmony that the world has lost. Further east, among the Dogon of Mali in West Africa, another enigma stirs. Long before telescopes, the Dogon priests spoke of the star Sirius, describing it as a binary system with a smaller, dense companion they called Po-Tolo. They said this star was made of a substance heavier than all the Earth's metals combined, and that their teachers, the Nommo, came from there in a vessel of fire that landed upon the water. Modern astronomy confirmed Sirius B, the white dwarf companion, only in the 19th century. How could an isolated tribe know the invisible details of a distant star? Coincidence, say the skeptics. Memory, say the myths. Each of these cultures, Nazca, Maya, Hopi, Dogon, lived continents apart, yet their messages point upward. They measure time by the same stars. They tell of beings who came from the same heavens. They await the same return. And always they build or draw or sing to the sky, as though the act itself could bridge the silence. Perhaps the flood erased the cities of the gods, but not the desire to speak to them again. In every pattern traced upon the earth, humanity is still trying to answer that old absence left when the heavens closed. Standing on the high plateau of Nazca at dawn, when the light slides low and golden across the plain, the figures seem to shimmer. The hummingbird points to the sunrise, the spider to the southern stars. Each shape aligns with something far beyond itself, as though the desert were an instrument tuned to the cosmos. Even the winds seem to hum across the lines, a faint vibration, like breath drawn by stone. We call these people primitive. But what if they were remembering something we have forgotten? What if their drawings were not attempts to contact the gods, but to maintain resonance with a world where heaven and earth once shared the same frequency? If the gods once walked the earth, perhaps they left not as tyrants, but as teachers who expected their students to keep speaking, to keep calling across the silence until the pattern returned. Every line in Nazca, every temple in Yucatan, every Hopi dance, every Dogon ritual, all are variations of the same act, remembering. An unbroken conversation stretching thousands of years, written in soil, sung in dust, carved in stone. The gods may have left the stage, but humanity kept the script. As night falls, the desert cools and the stars blaze into brilliance. Looking upward, one cannot help but feel that they are not watching us, but waiting. And far away, across oceans and millennia, other stones still stand. Too large, too precise, too timeless to have been built by chance. Their purpose forgotten, their builders unknown, yet their endurance unmatched. They are the last monuments of the gods' departure, the echo of footsteps that once shook the world. Across the continents, scattered among the bones of forgotten worlds, lie monuments too vast, too deliberate, to be explained away by simple invention. Their stones weigh hundreds of tons, fitted so tightly that a blade of grass cannot slip between them. They defy erosion, outlast empires, and whisper of builders who understood gravity as poetry. We call them megaliths, but perhaps they are more than that. Perhaps they are the last relics of an age when gods still walked beside men and when the earth itself was the canvas of their will. From the windswept plains of Baalbek in Lebanon rise stones the size of houses, some weighing over 1,000 tons. Archaeologists say they formed the base of a Roman temple, but the Romans never cut such stones, they built upon them. Beneath their columns lies something older, something they inherited. Local legend calls it the Terrace of the Giants, and it's easy to see why. Who could have moved such blocks with bronze chisels and rope? Who would even try, unless the laws of matter were different, or the beings who built them were not as we are? Far to the north, in England's green fields, Stonehenge stands like an unfinished equation. Its blue stones, hauled from mountains over 100 miles away, form circles aligned to solstice sunrises. It hums with resonance, like the pyramids, tuned to celestial rhythm. Each stone seems placed not just for sight, but for sound, the wind threading through gaps as if the monument itself were breathing. To the ancients, this was no ruin. It was a clock that measured eternity. Across the Mediterranean, Malta's megalithic temples bloom from the rock like fossilized waves. The oldest of them, Gantija, the place of the giants, was already ancient when the pyramids were new. Carved in curves rather than angles, they resemble the architecture of wombs or shells, resonant with feminine energy. Their builders vanished, their writing lost, their purpose unreadable, but the name remains, built by giants. Always that word. In Hebrew scripture, Nephilim. In Norse myth, Jotnar. In Greece, the Titans. Every culture remembers beings too large, too strong, too old to belong to mankind. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe offers the oldest mystery of all. 11,000 years before our time, at the end of the last ice age, people gathered on that hilltop to raise T-shaped monoliths covered with carved animals, foxes, lions, vultures, serpents. No villages surrounded it, no sign of farming or pottery. It appeared suddenly, complete, as if the builders came from nowhere, built the world's first temple, and then buried it on purpose. When it was unearthed, the stones still stood upright, preserved like a memory sealed against flood and forgetfulness. Archaeologists call it the birthplace of civilization, but what if it was the grave of the one before? Perhaps these stones endure because they were designed to, not merely as monuments, but as memory devices, capable of surviving the resets that erase paper, wood, and flesh. Each megalith a page of a book written for a future species, us, to find and remember. We measure their age, decode their geometry, and still we do not grasp the language they speak. Yet in the quiet between stones, something stirs, a hum of recognition, a shiver of déjà vu, as if our blood remembers what our minds have forgotten. Mythology and geology converge here, at the boundary between the human and the impossible. For thousands of years, We have unearthed skeletons of unusual size, femurs too large for any modern man, skulls with double rows of teeth, legends etched beside fossils. Science dismisses them as errors, hoaxes, coincidences, but myths endure longer than bones. They tell us that once the earth held a race of giants, offspring of gods and mortals, born in the twilight between worlds. Their monuments remain too vast to move, too sacred to destroy. They are the proof of something we no longer have words for. What if the giants were not monsters, but architects, the last generation of the divine, charged with preserving knowledge before the flood? What if Göbekli Tepe, Baalbek, and Stonehenge were not beginnings, but beacons, markers of a memory buried by time? The builders may have vanished, but their structures still align perfectly with the stars, as if guarding a calendar that counts not years, but epochs. The more we uncover, the clearer the pattern becomes. Every civilization begins by remembering, by imitating the gods who came before. Then, over ages, the memory fades. The symbols become rituals, and the rituals become myths. And when the cycle closes, the earth shudders again, and the silence returns. Maybe the gods did not abandon humanity out of wrath. Maybe they left to allow us to grow, to test whether we could remember their rhythm without their presence. Now, thousands of years later, we stand among their ruins with tools that can measure atoms, yet cannot measure meaning. We rebuild towers that scrape the clouds, satellites that circle the sky, and probes that pierce the dark, and still, we ask the same question the Sumerians once wrote in clay. Where did they go? Listen closely. In the stillness of these ancient stones you can almost hear it, a resonance too deep for words. Not a sound, but an impression, like the memory of thunder. It says, they came from the sky, and then softer. Perhaps they will come again, because time, like the gods, walks in circles. Every ending is a beginning seen from the other side. And when the stars return to their ancient alignments, Orion above Giza, Sirius at the horizon, the Pleiades over Teotihuacan, the pattern will complete itself once more. The silence will break. The sky will touch the earth again. So tonight, as you listen, look upward. The same constellations that guided our ancestors burn still, unchanged. They have watched us rise from clay and flood, from temple and tomb. Maybe they are waiting, not to rule again, but to see if we have learned to walk the earth as they once did. If these echoes of forgotten worlds still call to you, follow the stars, listen to the silence, and remember, the gods once walked the earth, and they left their footprints in stone. If you felt something stir while listening, a memory, a question, a spark, let it speak. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you think might still sleep beneath the world we know. Like this video if you want more journeys into the ancient unknown, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to Forgotten Worlds, where every week we search the ruins of time to remember what history tried to forget.